Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right in, shall we? You know that feeling when you're completely bombarded with complex information? Maybe it's an incredibly dense new book, a really challenging business strategy, or just a brand new skill you're trying to wrap your head around. Well, as I was digging into the source material for today, I came across this framework that absolutely transforms how we handle all of that. We're talking about learning faster, making decisions quicker, and literally cutting your study or decision-making time in half. Today, we're unpacking a framework designed to do exactly that, and it's called Thinking on Paper. It's a total game changer because it shifts us away from passive reading and mindless note-taking right into a highly active, highly efficient state of cognitive processing. So think about the last time you tried to read something super dense. As you take in more and more information, your confusion and that overwhelming feeling of, wow, this is a lot, naturally start to skyrocket. You're sitting there trying to balance all these new disjointed puzzle pieces in your head. And what is our natural, instinctive response to that overwhelm? We write it all down, right? We try to capture every single detail perfectly. But here's a massive paradigm shift for you. Writing everything down perfectly actually stops you from learning. Crazy, right? It actively bypasses the very cognitive processing that builds deep understanding and long-term memory. The source material uses this incredibly vivid analogy that just hits the nail on the head. Taking down every single detail when you're overwhelmed is literally the learning equivalent of going for a run to get fit, but halfway through you get tired, so you just jump in a car and drive to the finish line. I mean, sure, you're not tired or overwhelmed anymore, but you've completely defeated the entire point of the exercise. The goal wasn't to produce a perfect transcript, the goal was to build mental fitness. And this right here is what we call the note-taking trap. Whether you're cramming for an exam or prepping for a major strategic decision at work, your brain desperately needs to organize data. It has to process it to make it actually stick. But the absolute second we give in to that urge to just mindlessly transcribe the information, mostly just to relieve our own anxiety, we fall right into the trap. We trade genuine learning for the temporary, false comfort of just having ink on a page. It's a pretty stark contrast when you think about it. Traditional note-taking focuses entirely on capturing a perfect record, which usually just creates this giant, overwhelming document that you somehow have to study later. On the flip side, thinking on paper is a completely different beast. It zeroes in on keywords and actually forces your brain to actively process the material right there in the moment. It is purpose-built to create immediate clarity, not some massive textbook you have to revisit later. And to pull this off, there's a really simple three-part framework we need to master.
Which brings us to the very first pillar of this framework. Principle 1. Make it wrong. Yep, actually, scratch that instinct to be perfect. Just make it wrong. If what you write is right, you're doing it wrong. Look, we have all been totally brainwashed by the school system to be perfectionists. When you start taking notes or drawing up a mind map, you desperately want everything to be correct, accurate, and beautifully organized from the very first stroke of the pen. But if you try to do that with completely new, complex information, you are going to hit analysis paralysis instantly. You won't know where to start, which keyword to jot down first, or how to categorize a single thing, because, well, you literally don't understand it yet.
Think of it kind of like a giant jigsaw puzzle. When you rip open a brand new 1,000-piece puzzle, you don't immediately know how all those tiny pieces snap together, do you? No. Your first job isn't to connect them perfectly. Your first job is just to dump the pieces out of the box and spread them on the table so you can actually see what you're working with. And that is exactly what you are doing with new information. You are just getting the dots out of your overloaded head and onto the paper. You don't need to know how they connect yet. You're putting them down specifically so you can figure that out. And this unlocks something amazing, the power of guessing. As you're reading or listening, your only job is to quickly throw keywords onto the page and take wild, inaccurate guesses at how they might connect. Say you're reading up on learning science. You might just throw down words like memory, cognitive load, and thalamus. You might drop a messy line connecting them just because they all sound like brain stuff. Even if you are 100% totally wrong, the pure physical act of taking a rough guess actively primes your brain. It builds this temporary mental scaffolding, so as you keep reading, you absorb the actual correct information incredibly fast.
Okay, so once you've fully embraced making a mess, you're ready for principle 2, make it shorter.
If you want to master complex information quickly, it requires brutal distillation. If you're trying to master a dense subject in a month that takes other people years, you simply cannot spend hours writing out long, flowing sentences. To make sure you don't do that, here are your hard and fast formatting rules for thinking on paper. First, absolutely zero full sentences. Second, keywords only. And third, messy handwriting is totally, completely fine. The source material actually shares this great little anecdote about a tired, jet-lagged doctor scribbling practically illegible notes. And why is that fine? Because your notes don't need to be pretty. They are just a memory anchor, a tiny little trigger for your own brain to remember what you were thinking at that exact second. With modern AI, you can always summarize the reference text later anyway. These notes are purely for your immediate brain processing. It's wild to see how drastically the word count drops when we distill things down. A traditional note-taker might write out a whole sentence like, write down keywords quickly. But someone thinking on paper, they distill that whole idea into one single word, fast. Look at what you've written just becomes examine. Synthesizing a full sentence down into a single punchy keyword actually forces a tremendous amount of active cognitive processing. It genuinely takes significantly more mental effort to concisely summarize an idea than it does to just waffle on for a whole page.
And this leads us to a super fascinating science-backed truth. More words literally equal less processing. Research shows that as your word count goes up, your retention and your depth of understanding actually drop. Why? Because excessive words bog down your brain's ability to spot visual patterns. If you have to reread an entire paragraph just to remember how concept A connects to concept B, you totally lose the overarching visual pattern. Keywords, on the other hand, allow your eyes to dart rapidly across the page, instantly spotting the relationships and connections between really complex ideas. All right, that brings us to the final and honestly the most powerful step of the whole thing. Principle 3, make it again. So you've made your messy guesses and you've kept everything super short. Now, as you continue to take in more information, say you read for another 15 minutes, you are naturally going to realize that some of your early guesses were just dead wrong. Your paper is going to start looking incredibly messy, and that is absolutely perfect, because fixing those mistakes and cleaning up that mess is exactly how you consolidate learning. We organize to create memory. So how exactly do we do that? Through deliberate reorganization tactics. You regroup, you rearrange, and you reconnect. Let me share a fantastic example from the source material about learning science. Let's say you originally grouped explicit memory, working memory, and long-term memory all under one bucket you called types of memory. But as you learn a bit more, you realize, wait a second, that doesn't actually make sense because their definitions overlap and they aren't totally distinct things. So you literally cross them out and draw new lines grouping them properly. The very act of physically fixing that flawed categorization strengthens your understanding without you even needing to read any new information. The deep learning happens in the fixing. When you combine all of these elements together, you're no longer just a passive receiver. You're taking the pure chaos of a dense book or a super complicated meeting, and you are systematically replacing that overwhelm with genuine, deep clarity and structural organization. Let's lock this framework in one last time. Step 1, make it wrong. Get those puzzle pieces on the table. Do not worry about perfection. Step 2, make it shorter. Use only keywords to force that deep cognitive processing. And step 3, make it again. Fix your messy guesses to permanently consolidate the memory. And the best part? You can use this exact system literally anywhere. It works just as brilliantly during a grueling 5-hour study session as it does when you're trying to untangle a complex strategy in a fast-paced business meeting. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. We spent so much of our lives trying to make our notes, our plans, and our first drafts look like perfect little masterpieces. But true learning, true comprehension, it's inherently messy. So are you ready to stop making masterpieces that teach you absolutely nothing and start making the kind of messes that actually make you brilliant? Grab a pen, ditch the full sentences, and try thinking on paper today. You might just cut your learning time in half. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep learning.